Good afternoon. Again, I'm PJ BROWNLEE, curator at the Terra Foundation, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to the afternoon session. So come in and take your seats, and we will begin. Our first paper of the afternoon, our colleague Eleanor Harvey from the Smithsonian American Art Museum will be speaking on Frederic Church's Heart of the Andes.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is a great pleasure to be here. I'm deeply appreciative both of the professionals here at UNAM and at the Terra Foundation for providing this opportunity, and I am grateful to be in your company today. So we've talked about Alexander von Humboldt as a recovery project. We've wrestled with the modern implications of his ideas, but also his background and his mindset. I'm going to take you in a different direction. I'm going to take you on a deep dive into what Alexander von Humboldt meant in the United States and during his own lifetime. In the preface to the third edition of Aspects of Nature, Humboldt exulted, "There is freedom in the mountains. The breath of the crypt does not rise into the pure air. The world is completely perfect everywhere where man does not take his problems." For Humboldt, that freedom was embodied in the massive dome of Chimborazo, then believed to be the tallest mountain on the planet, and as we know, whose summit enjoys the distinction of being the furthest point from the Earth's core due to the bulge at the equator. Humboldt had ascended to about 19,413 feet, dressed in 18th century clothes, using no supplemental oxygen, and carrying delicate scientific instruments to record the altitude and the increasingly harsh weather conditions. This benign vista that Humboldt engraved for his pictorial atlas bore little resemblance to the actual conditions of his climb, but the information Humboldt returned with was a turning point in the naturalist's view of nature. Humboldt exhorted artists to understand science behind their observations and naturalists to maintain an aesthetic sensibility while collecting and conducting their experiments. Humboldt referred to Chimborazo as his favorite mountain, and during his lifetime, it became affectionately known as Humboldt's Mountain. But what does it mean to ascend Humboldt's Mountain? For the traveler himself, it meant finding an appropriate metaphor for describing not just the geology, the sequence of biomes, or the measure of the intensity of the blue sky near the summit. It was conveying to everyone else the raw power of nature to aesthetically and scientifically recalibrate your life. So let's start with the mountain itself. About Chimborazo, Humboldt had exulted, "Travelers who have approached the summits of Mont Blanc and Montrose are alone capable of feeling the character of this calm, majestic, and solemn scenery." The massive snow-capped summit of Chimborazo towered over the rest of the Andean Cordillera, prompting Humboldt to compare it to St. Peter's in Rome. Quote, "Like that majestic dome produced by the genius of Michelangelo over antique monuments which surround the capital," unquote. In the United States, Humboldt's equivalences between Old World architectural monuments and New World natural features spurred and reinforced the rapid development of a nature-based aesthetic linking American scenery with the new nation's cultural ambitions. For American artist Frederic Edwin Church, Humboldt's description of Chimborazo made his South American sojourn seem equivalent to the European Grand Tour for landscape painters. It also gave him a worthy focal point for this second trip to the Andes. In the field, Church created a suite of drawings and oil sketches of Chimborazo and the surrounding Andean plateau. As this painting took shape in his mind, those sketches cemented the link between his own artistic production and Humboldt's grand vision. So Frederic Edwin Church grew up reading about Humboldt. Born in 1826, he was raised in a country deeply steeped in Humboldt's ideas and surrounded by people who helped make his books among the most widely read in the United States. By 1853, when Church undertook his first of two trips to South America, he was rapidly becoming America's premier landscape painter. He had by this time read and absorbed Humboldt's views of the Cordilleras, which he used as his Baedeker. His itinerary made the same stops. It afforded Church the opportunity to reenact some of Humboldt's climbs and fulfill Humboldt's hope that he should have, quote, accomplished my sole purpose if the feeble sketches contained in this work should lead other travelers, friends of the arts, to visit the regions which I traversed and to retrace accurately those stupendous scenes to which the old continent offers no resemblance. Church's painting of Cotopaxi with this first trip is a summation of the 7 months he spent in South America, featuring what Humboldt called the perfect cinder cone of Cotopaxi and the added feature of one of the haciendas where Humboldt had stayed 50 years earlier. This first trip whetted Church's appetite, and in 1857, he returned to South America. This was a much shorter trip, the focus of which was a return to the volcanoes of the Andes for an intense 3-month study centered on Humboldt's mountain. Church's oil sketches, which you see here, reflect the artist's compositional experiments in how to feature a mountain that meant so much to Humboldt. Humboldt's words were like a voice, whispering in Church's ear, or a hand on his shoulder, pointing out what characteristic aspects of the South American landscape, highlighting its singular features while noting details about the local inhabitants in their culture. As Humboldt said, observe, collect, measure, connect. Those sketches were the beginning of that process. When Church turned his attention to painting the heart of the Andes, Humboldt was in the forefront of his mind. In his Naturgemälde, which we have seen twice today, published in 1805, Humboldt had compressed a staggering amount of information onto a single sheet of paper. Chimborazo was the standard against which Humboldt calibrated all of the corollary data collected on European mountains. The whole was a picture far greater than its fragmentary parts. What Humboldt had visualized was an argument, that altitude and geology on each continent could predict the appearance of particular families of plants. Humboldt's Pictures of Nature was a half-verbal, half-pictorial essay on what he had observed climbing from the tropical lowlands to over 19,000 feet above sea level. It was also his first efforts to synthesize the information that he had culled from climbing mountains in Germany, France, Italy, Switzerland, and now South America. And in the accompanying essay on the geography of plants, having found similar types in each place, he began his exhaustive comparative analysis, using them as the syntax for his larger narrative about how everything on the globe was interconnected and how one place could shed light on another. The brilliance of Humboldt's epiphany was that he could correlate information from various mountain chains on multiple continents and use that comparative data to develop the higher laws of nature. His later illustrations continued to reflect this duality. The engravings in his books are sometimes fully resolved artistic compositions like the Plains of Tapia, and at other times were a hybrid of illusionistic renderings coupled with scientific names of plants and rock types. Humboldt relied on both kinds of knowledge in formulating and illustrating his theories of interdependence and connections. His approach eventually animated multiple disciplines that branched out to become each of the physical sciences. But it is Humboldt's plant geography map that laid the groundwork for the Prussian explorers' ideas, and 40 years later acted as a template for Cosmos. And even here, aesthetics plays a role in Humboldt's scientific observations, as he captured the temperature, barometric pressure, characteristic features, and used a cyanometer that you see here to measure the exact shade of blue in the clear sky. The atmosphere atop Chimborazo delivered the most intense blue he had ever recorded, 46 on a scale of 52. The heart of the Andes was Church's extrapolation of Humboldt's Naturgemälde. The list of atmospheric effects, weather conditions, typical plants, and rock specimens correlated on Humboldt's Naturgemälde was a revelation to the Prussian naturalist, and the essay on the geography of plants was an index for Church's distribution of plants across the heart of the Andes. Using a synthesis of Humboldt's data and his own direct observation in his sketches, Church began to work up this painting as a deliberate homage to Humboldt. The overwhelming amount of detail in Humboldt's map easily transferred onto canvas. Like Humboldt, Church compiled and arrayed everything he had learned in an effort to discern natural laws and distill larger truths. As Humboldt saw it, the Andean Plateau moved from the equatorial tropical basins to the Arctic snowfields, moving vertically up the Cordilleras instead of at sea level along the lines of longitude. The heart of the Andes accounts for plants that Humboldt had collected and chronicled from the near-tropical equatorial valley floor up to the Arctic summit, a span of more than 10,000 vertical feet. Church added the third dimension to Humboldt's flattened template, allowing the visitor's eye to float over the foreground into the vast middle distance, across the vast llano, up the rumpled sides of the mountain chain. The recognizable summit of Chimborazo, instead of being the focal point, now became the destination, just out of reach, the most far distant point in the landscape. Chimborazo was not a peak to be summited so much as the capstone to a world to be understood. Church, like Humboldt, combined observations from different geographical sources. He captured the overwhelming moment of understanding that without those massive quantities of data, without as nearly complete an understanding of a place as possible, all we are capable of comprehending are isolated fragments. On one 6-foot by 10-foot canvas, the artist covered the same range of territory, incorporating the same density of detail and invoking a similar acuity of observation. Critic Henry Tuckerman had admired Humboldt's ability to absorb massive quantities of information and then synthesize it into a comprehensible idea. He noted that Humboldt's, quote, great distinction is the comprehensive view he takes of the laws and the facts of the physical world. No naturalist ever so united minute observation with the ability to generalize. The smallest trait of material form or action did not evade his curious eye, and the grandest hypothesis could not subdue his intellectual soul. Tuckerman went on to praise how Humboldt could intuitively recognize the unity of nature and understood the relative worth of details far better than those who were satisfied with grasping them in an isolated way. There was nothing accidental or inadvertent about the way Church composed this painting. He intended it to be, like Humboldt's Cosmos, a singular work that relied on a lifetime's accumulated experiences and observations brought together in the service of a larger expression of the capacity for the natural world to be both overwhelming and satisfying all at once. In Humboldt's third volume of Cosmos, published before Church took his second trip to South America, the traveler stated his case even more emphatically, quote, I have considered nature from a twofold point of view. In the first place, I have endeavored to present her in the pure objectiveness of external phenomena, and secondly, as the reflection of the image impressed upon the senses of the inner man, that is, upon his ideas and feelings, unquote. With the heart of the Andes, Church strove to achieve the synthesis of Humboldt's dual objectives. Close observation informed his method, and Humboldt's quest to find the common threads tying together all of creation inspired the means by which he created the largest and arguably the most synthetic composition of his career. It's worth pausing to understand what Church intended with this painting and how he constructed it. First, let's consider how it differs from the paintings Church produced following his first trip to South America. The work that stood out to the art critics of the day was the Andes of Ecuador, extolled for the warm, humid light that suffuses the landscape. That quality of saturation, of landforms bathed in a harmonious glow, appealed to North American viewers, as it presented a landscape that was both lovely, if unfamiliar. Although it seems to be the visual evocation of the unity of nature promised by Humboldt, it is in fact more similar to Humboldt's lectures, in which he riffs on a singular idea, portraying the sense of place in its ideal form rather than examining the concrete reality of the place itself. The lyrical qualities of the Andes of Ecuador stand in pronounced contrast to the crispness of each individual plant and landform in the heart of the Andes. So if the Andes of Ecuador captures the mesmerizing quality of Humboldt's lectures, the heart of the Andes wrestles with the impossibility of getting every single piece of information into a single book. The progression from Andes of Ecuador to the heart of the Andes may be read in its titles, as Church moved from a generalized and distilled overview to portraying the overwhelming amount of specific information pulled from his sketches. In doing so, he followed Humboldt's own progression, visible in his cutaway landscape maps, moving from the accumulation of raw data to a synthesis of its meaning, and from there diving back to arrive at a more nuanced and complete understanding of nature. If the Andes of Ecuador visualizes the moment of synthesis, the heart of the Andes revels in the restlessness associated with the endless discovery of new data with which to grapple. In the heart of the Andes, Church's reach, like Humboldt's, exceeds his grasp. But neither man ceased striving for that monumental achievement. Humboldt's public lectures, beginning in 1827, sketched the framework for Cosmos, but in lecture form, Humboldt was able to hold in his mind the totality of his argument, bringing in selective evidence to bear on the distillation of his ideas. When forced to put pen to paper, he found it far more difficult to organize the vast quantities of data he had amassed and absorbed over the years. His travel journals bore annotations accrued over several decades, and he cannibalized the letters and notes, sometimes sticking them together with sealing wax or sorting them by topics into envelopes bearing single words like mountains or slavery. These aggregations of evidence complicated his arguments that rang more clearly in distilled form, whether it was in a single line in a letter to a friend or the free flow of an extemporaneous lecture. Humboldt would spend the better part of 14 years organizing the data stored in his head and scattered through thousands of pages of notes. As a result, reading Cosmos is like reading a well-ordered stream of consciousness, with one brilliant coruscating idea segueing into another, the trajectory loosely structured but prone to diversions and byways en route to the next intersection of evidence and ideas. Like Humboldt's books, Church's painting is a massive, overwhelming, exuberant, impassioned compendium of all that Church had learned from his absent mentor. Church orchestrated the display of Heart of the Andes on Broadway, April 27, 1829. The colossal painting appeared even larger thanks to an elaborate frame designed to resemble a window casement. Parted draperies intensified that illusion. That frame served mostly as a reminder that what we see is still a fragment of the whole, a synecdoche, perhaps, of all of South America. The Heart of the Andes presents the essence of the artist's metaphorical journey of scientific understanding and the revelations accrued from it, given back as a singular summation rather than a poetic synthesis. Compositionally, it barely contains the superabundance of data drawn from those 2 trips to South America and incorporates close to a decade of close study of Humboldt's writings. A moment absorbed in examination, and apparently the real scene is before you. The medium of its expression disappears. So said Robert Walter Weir in a letter published in the New York Post. He pronounced, "Humboldt has given us the word painting of the magnificent scene of this picture, and now comes the true magician with his harp of 1,000 strings to present the subtle tones that no words can describe." No one doubted the power behind Church's pictorial accomplishment, but the sheer volume of information, coupled with the lack of a single fixed focal point, made viewing it as much of a challenge as visiting the actual volcano. But the Heart of the Andes does not promise visual coherence. It instead holds out the rewards of close looking and aesthetic and scientific inquiry, and the willingness to see the mountain as the apex of an ecosystem that extended from the Amazon River basin near the equator, across the Llano, up through the foothills, and ultimately among the peaks of the Andean Cordillera. That vertical progression from a tropical foreground to an Arctic summit accomplished another of Humboldt's goals, that if extrapolating the changes in climate and habitats, if one were to travel from the equator to the poles, moving laterally from a tropical environment to a polar one. Whether working in a latitudinal or a longitudinal vector, their results were similar. Plants and climate were linked together, their appearance and location predictable by type as one moved around the globe and compared similar landforms. Humboldt himself had ruefully admitted the impossibility of encapsulating all of South America in a single linear narrative, a perspective that applies equally to Church's Heart of the Andes. Humboldt: "It is a difficult task to describe those sensations which act with so much more force as if they have something undefined, produced by the immensity of the space as well as by the greatness, the novelty, and the multitude of objects amidst which we find ourselves transported. When a traveler attempts to furnish descriptions of the loftiest summits of the globe, the cataracts of the great rivers, the tortuous valleys of the Andes, he is exposed to the danger of fatiguing his readers by the monotonous expression of his admiration." Church encountered a similar dilemma in his own work. The fragments he accrued through his sketches and diary entries and letters, when brought together in the service of a single Humboldtian homage, threatened to overwhelm rather than enlighten his viewer. The reviewer for the Crayon expressed this as a shortcoming, noting that the artist had sacrificed pictorial unity and repose and instead, quote, "every square inch of the canvas is covered with nature's statistics," unquote. This, the reviewer concluded, meant that instead of being absorbed by the scene, the viewer's mind was employed upon an infinity of details. What Church's painting does is provides a visual simulacrum for the experiencing of dipping in and out of Humboldt's oeuvre, coming up for air and diving in again through successive encounters with this painting. As Church painted the Heart of the Andes, he was also planning to ship the work to Berlin, with the object of placing before Humboldt a transcript of the scenery which delighted his eyes 60 years ago, and for Humboldt to see how deeply the American artist had absorbed Humboldt's philosophy of nature. The American travel writer Bayard Taylor, who had met and spent time with Humboldt, agreed to write a letter of introduction to present to Humboldt. Taylor's letter to the aging explorer expressed his hope that were Humboldt to, quote, "recognize its truthfulness and take delight in it, the painter will count himself fortunate, for he feels that you have shown him the way he has taken with such great success," unquote. The New York Times anointed Church the artistic Humboldt of the New World. So what does it mean to so fully absorb a Humboldtian ethos that it consumed an artist's way of working, permeating his subject matter, regardless of where he traveled? Like Humboldt, Church sought out more distinct and challenging subject matter. He followed up the Heart of the Andes with a trip to Labrador, where, having read extensively ahead of time about the properties of ice, refraction, and water, he was able to draw and paint sketches of icebergs while fending off persistent seasickness. In doing so, Church himself moved from the vertical climb up Chimborazo to the lateral voyage to Labrador. His trek from the equator to the pole of perpetual ice fulfilled Humboldt's desire to observe those changes in the landscape, recording the characteristic features at both ends of this spectrum. Vladimir Nabokov described the intersection of science and art as being, quote, "the high ridge where the mountainside of scientific knowledge joins the opposite slope of artistic imagination," unquote. Church remained devoted to that intersection. In 1883, he wrote, "I wish science would take a holiday for 10 years so that I could catch up." But that intersection of art and science, to go back to Humboldt, to observe, to collect, to measure, and connect, is a reminder of the benefits of sustained interaction with nature and the environment for both the scientist and the artist. The Heart of the Andes captures that intersection and in turn reflects Humboldt's sustained influence on the artistic and scientific worldview of Frederic Edwin Church. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Eleanor. Let me open the floor. Questions, comments?
They're big shoes to fill and broad shoulders to stand on, let me just say.
Having already done a massive project on the history of landscape painting and its relation and transformation as a result of historical phenomena, its relation to historical events like the Civil War and its transformation. Can you ruminate on that in this context? Is there a kind of Humboldtian genre of landscape painting that's distinct from other manifestations of the genre?
I think the Humboldtian aspect of American landscape painting in particular is that synthesis between art and science, the desire to be as informed about the trees that you are painting, the rock strata that you are recording. As a matter of background, I switched majors from geology to art history, and in the process discovered that my landscape painters mostly wanted to be scientifically minded when they grew up, but they were too busy playing hooky outdoors, sketching the landscape to apply themselves in the classroom. But what they understood was that accuracy mattered, that there was value in veracity, that making it up and was actually considered a fault. And it will continue. Church at the end of his life will disdain Impressionism because he believes that it is not a retinal advance on the way we understand the world, but a sloppy slide around the work you have to do to get it right. It's like the compulsories in figure skating. It's like, if you don't know how to do your perfect figure eight, why should I watch you do a triple axel? So I think that the timing of Humboldt's visit in 1804 launched American landscape painting as an endeavor designed to give America, the United States, with its complete lack of architecturally significant monuments dating back centuries the way you had on the European continent, we took from Humboldt's admiration of American natural monuments an ethos that said, you can have the mausoleum at Halicarnassus. We've got Natural Bridge, we've got Niagara Falls. As we go west, we have the Trans-Mississippi, we have the Grand Canyon, we have Yosemite, we have Yellowstone. Our monuments are made by God, they're better than yours, so there. You know, chips on both shoulders, but the idea was we developed a cultural ethos grounded in what was already here, not what we built on top of it. And so knowing it was a process of claiming it, which gets you into the contested territory of belonging and ownership and identification on a cultural standpoint, which Humboldt was certainly concerned about. By the time you get to the Civil War, a funny thing happens. Humboldt begins to diminish in importance, partly because we're distracted for 4 years, by which time we're already absorbing Darwin, and the ground has shifted out from under us. Scientific veracity has shifted from the realm of the arts into the realms of the sciences, and it will not come back together again except through specific artists until we get into the middle of the 20th century, and really with the eco-critical environmental movement. I mean, Rachel Carson could have had Humboldt whispering in her ear when she wrote Silent Spring. The downstream consequences of DDT in your ecosystem is very similar to what Humboldt was seeing at Lake Valencia with the destruction of the trees, the change of erosion patterns, and the inability to sustain agriculture, and the first concrete evidence in his mind of human-induced climate change. So Humboldt weaves in and out, but I think Louis Agassiz put it best in 1869 in his eulogy, where he said, every school child has been taught by Humboldt. No one knows the name of his teacher. That permeation, that saturation, that dissipation means that Humboldt's name is no longer linked specifically to these things. It is simply a matter of received wisdom about how weather patterns begin to move, the need for geomagnetic stations. And so the legacy he leaves is essentially to cast a very long shadow, but in effect disappear in the process.
Thanks.
Sure.
Veronica.
Thank you. I keep finding things in this painting, and
Oh,
this
yeah.
was really fascinating. And I do have a question, maybe, because I know the Colombian context and maybe not the one in Ecuador, but one thing that I find church fascinating, but then there's the other side that's always kind of bothered me is that he came through Colombia and Ecuador, but he left nothing. He took all of this back home and produced these magnificent images. And for example, in Colombia, we have no work by him, but not just the artworks, but he was there at a time when the liberal government were trying to survey the landscape, federalism was going on, all of this. And I think the one work on his stay in Colombia is the one that was made by our former president of our university on his trip to Colombia. But all of the material, at no point did he teach anyone there, did he leave anything there? And it's like he just came right through as if he had never come. There was no footprint. There's no actual footprint, both Colombia and I think Ecuador. I don't know if with Troya maybe, but I don't know if you've found anything on that.
I actually think that that is more true of American artists traveling abroad than not. Martin Johnson Heade will do the same thing in Brazil. I think there's a voyeuristic element to all of this where they are so focused on Humboldt that it's almost as though they are not diving deep into where they are. Part of it, I think, is that when Humboldt traveled, he hired indigenous guides, he learned the languages, he immersed himself to the extent that he could with the people. It doesn't mean he didn't transgress, he did. But there was a sense that he was all in and all there and very present in the moment. I think that Church traveled as a nervous foreigner. He barely knows Spanish. The vocabulary he keeps in his first diary is food, and I think he just wants to know what he's eating. There is nothing in there about the history. There is nothing about the topography. And all of his descriptions, it's like he read, when he went to Tequendama Falls, when he read Humboldt the night before, he now is recreating, he's hiring people to chop away the foliage so he gets the same view that Humboldt did. He's a fanboy. He's channeling Humboldt on this reunion tour through here. And it's like he has no connection with anyone there. And it's actually one of the more disappointing things about his travels is that he's not in the moment. It's like he's always a little on edge and he's always a little distant. And I mean, I can understand that when I travel to a place where I know nothing of the language, it takes me a while to get into the rhythm of feeling like, okay, I'm here, I'm comfortable. I don't know that he ever got comfortable.
He complained a lot. I've read
He does complain a lot, but he does that in Europe too.
being stranded.
No, he just complains. I actually think that he was a high-maintenance pain in the neck, but he's a brilliant painter. But holy smokes, I'll take Sanford Gifford as a traveling companion, thank you. I love the guy, but no, no. Sorry.
Maybe one last question, either for Eleanor or Church, the fanboy. Here we go.
Bueno, yo tengo un comentario, lo voy a hacer en español.
I can try.
Okay.
All right, hold on a minute. Oh, come on. Right, left, there we go. Short head. Sí.
Bueno, entonces mi comentario tiene que ver también con una lectura que hago entre precisamente esta pintura y dos exposiciones que tuvimos en la mañana. Una tiene que ver con cuando hablábamos del imperio de la ciencia, de Empire of Science, y es que en esta pintura particularmente, y también entendiendo a Church como un fan de Humboldt, acá hay digamos que unas irregularidades en términos de representación, y es que hay una planta del género Cyathiosae en este ecosistema que vendría a ser un ecosistema alto andino que no corresponde, porque la Cyathiosae es de una área más baja. Sin embargo, para él era sumamente relevante representarla, porque era uno de los grandes hallazgos de Humboldt. Luego también hay otro rasgo como de imposición en el paisaje, que es que la firma de Church se encuentra en el árbol que vemos al lado izquierdo de la pintura, en donde el árbol se encuentra sin corteza y ahí está impuesta la firma de Church, que es algo recurrente porque en la pintura del Salto de Tequendama también la firma de Church se encuentra a modo de graffiti en una roca del Salto. Eso por un lado. Y la otra vinculación que yo haría sería con la exposición que veíamos del pico de Yaragua, y es finalmente esta pintura entendiéndola como la filosofía de la naturaleza y no como algo que Humboldt hubiera impuesto, pero sí como una lectura posible de esa propuesta de Humboldt de la naturaleza. Y en esa medida es interesante sumarle una lectura antropológica a esto, porque es una lectura posible y que sí se hereda de Humboldt, y es objetivizar el entorno. Algo que viene a resaltar Viveiros de Castro y de Colá con otras ontologías posibles, y de entender cómo otros hombres entienden ese entorno y les adjudican almas y les adjudican esencias. Y en esa medida me parece sumamente valiosa como poder conectar esas tres exposiciones.
That's a lot. Let me try. What Church is doing is painting. This is an outward manifestation of his inner understanding of Humboldt. It is not, I don't believe, intended to be as much about South America as it is about Church himself. One of the things Church does with frequency is incorporate his signature in the landscape, and he does it in two different ways. First, on the tree here in the lower left, in the shaft of light, are his initials and the date, which is a typical thing for American artists to do. We like tree trunks. We put our initials on them a lot. But the second is, if you go from there through the cross to the church that is in the small village dead center in the painting, Church will often put a small church or a cross in his paintings as a second feature. He actually does this whether he is in New England or in South America. When Cyrus Field, his patron, buys his West Rock, New Haven, there is no evidence of a church steeple or a hay bale in the pencil sketch, but in the finished work there is a church steeple and hay in the field as a play on church and field. So he likes his visual puns. I think the other thing that comes along with this is when Church is there in 1853 and 1857, he is not a proto-ecologist. This is not a man who is channeling the 20th century or the 21st century. He is channeling Humboldt's endless resources. He is seeing it in, there are over 127 recognizable plants in this painting alone. It's nuts. He is not seeing this as a landscape in jeopardy, nor is he seeing it as a landscape so much ripe for extraction, so much as it is a kind of visual encyclopedia of a world that is very different from the one in which he is growing up. He is, in many ways, signaling himself as the classic odd outsider. That will almost invariably make him slightly tone deaf, in the same way that Humboldt is occasionally slightly tone deaf about the sensitivities and sensibilities of the places where he is going. So from that standpoint, I think that in creating a highly synthetic compendium of 5 biomes in a place where you could never see all of this in one place. He is already announcing the fact that he is renouncing the reality of here and now for a kind of larger intellectual viewpoint about what drew him to South America. And I think that, quite frankly, had Humboldt gone to Asia instead, this would have been the heart of Asia instead of the heart of the Andes. I think it was following Humboldt wherever Humboldt went, not necessarily following a place that church was deeply vested in. And I think that really is the key tension in this picture is it was received in the United States as a man deeply in love with his subject matter. And I think as long as you recognize that the subject is Alexander von Humboldt, that's correct. I will say one last thing, which is this is a drop in the ocean of a project I've been working on for the last 6 years. It's an exhibition that will be on view at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. from March of 2020 through August, called Alexander von Humboldt and the United States, Art, Nature, and Culture. And it is really about how we became a culture obsessed with nature, what we took from Humboldt at a key moment in our history, and the downstream consequences 50 years later of that visit. Although this painting will not be there, we are doing a 3D video swoop and dive interpretation so that you begin to understand how much territory church put into this canvas. And we like to think the silver lining is that when you go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, you can't see above the middle of the picture the way it's hung on the wall because it is 6 feet tall and it is not resting on the floor. We will allow you to see the vulture and the rainbow in the upper right-hand corner, the fire and the waterfall in the middle of the volcanic highlands, and begin to understand how this painting forms a trek through the landscape as a pilgrimage to get to that mountain in a similar way to a religious pilgrimage in Europe or the Middle East. So if your travel plans bring you to Washington, please make a stop at the Smithsonian. I would love to see you again, and we can have another conversation about Alex. Thank you.
Thank you, Eleanor. Okay, our next talk is Omar Olivares, who's affiliated with the Getty Grant Program in Los Angeles. He'll be speaking on Rafael Troya's Cotopaxi, Vista de la Cordillera, Oriental, desde Tiopullo.
Es presentación Troya, Cotopaxi. Sí. Exacto. Thank you, PJ. I think I'll be the first one presenting in Spanish. So, George, Humboldt, and Darwin, The Tension and Harmony of Art and Science, que algunos recordarán que la extinción de la pintura del paisaje, tal como la practicaba Frederic Edwin Church, se debía al cisma paradigmático que ocasionó la visión evolutiva de Darwin respecto al concepto romántico con que Humboldt pensó el mundo natural. Para Gould, no solo la publicación en 1859 de El origen de las especies habría extinguido la concepción natural de Humboldt y todas sus expresiones paisajísticas, sino que clausuró rotundamente la alianza que habían sostenido la ciencia y el arte hasta entonces. Por fortuna, la historia del paisaje en las Américas parece contradecir las conclusiones del biólogo. La ciencia postdarwiniana no cerró sus transacciones con distintas culturas visuales, al igual que el paisaje y las propias posturas de Humboldt no desaparecieron. La estética del paisaje se transformó en una forma de reflexión seminal sobre las relaciones entre naturaleza y cultura. El Cotopaxi del pintor ecuatoriano Rafael Troya es una de las imágenes más enigmáticas del paisajismo americano. Desde mi punto de vista, el paisaje cuyo título es Vista de la Cordillera Oriental desde Tiopullo representa la mutación compleja del programa estético humboldtiano en las Américas. A través de un ancho campo de visión, lo que se ve en la pintura es una franja importante de los Andes. El Cotopaxi, del lado izquierdo, se impone en el inicio del recorrido y en el extremo derecho aparece la cumbre nevada del Chimborazo. Ambos volcanes fueron hitos de la expedición humboldtiana en la región. Entre ambas moles se dibujan otros volcanes prominentes de la cordillera oriental andina como el Altar, el Tungurahua y el Cariguairazo. La fisonomía de la cadena de volcanes es, sin duda, el foco de atención de esta representación de la naturaleza andina. En las laderas del Cotopaxi y hacia los planos medios se definen con detalle las formas y pliegues del terreno. Se ven las áreas que tienen una cobertura vegetal y en las que se expone el suelo. En el primer plano se ven tipos particulares de plantas en las que se destaca, salvo una mejor identificación, la Brachiotum ledifolium, típica del páramo andino. Del lado derecho se encuentra una mujer que teje junto a un rebaño. Por encima de ella, un árbol de una especie desconocida se levanta para rebasar el horizonte del fondo. No cabe duda que la obra es una amalgama de diferentes elementos: panorama de la fisonomía andina y descripción geológica, escena pastoral y observación botánica. Captura y entrelaza un conjunto amplio de observaciones, característica que aproxima esta representación al concepto de Humboldt sobre el paisaje. A través de esta pintura, quiero problematizar el desarrollo de una estética post-humboldtiana tardía en la visualidad del paisaje de distintas regiones del continente. Busco caracterizar la expansión de la sensibilidad humboldtiana sobre el paisaje y la geología, al igual que su mutación radical una vez ocurrió su aplicación sistemática. Este proceso es parte del tránsito por el cual las nociones y las representaciones de Humboldt devinieron un imaginario americano común en el marco de las experiencias históricas convulsas de la América poscolonial. La pintura de Rafael Troya se ve atravesada por este fenómeno. Si bien hasta 1871 Troya era un artista encauzado en la pintura religiosa y el retrato, a partir de ese año, cuando fue contratado por los geólogos alemanes Alfons Stubel y Wilhelm Reis para una expedición por los volcanes andinos, se convirtió en un paisajista de talante científico. Un paisaje muy similar al de la Cordillera Oriental se publicó en la obra Skizzen aus Ecuador de 1886. En él se ve casi el mismo perfil de volcanes, mientras que en el primer plano aparecen muchos más personajes. Ahora está el numeroso grupo expedicionario, aunque sin los dos geólogos alemanes. La imagen se describe en la obra como una alusión al conjunto más importante de personas y animales que los acompañaron durante toda la expedición. Cada uno de los personajes merece una referencia en el pie de imagen, incluso los animales. En el número 34 se representa una mula negra, el 35 un macho sogamoso, hay una mula manzanilla, una mula tortilla, una mula rosilla, mula yumba, mula morocha, macho pícaro, macho gallinazo. Hacia el lado derecho de la escena, con el número 21, se encuentra Rafael Troya. Es el único individuo que dirige su mirada hacia afuera de la escena. Troya acompañó la exploración de Reis y Stubel entre 1871 y 1873. En este periodo realizó 80 pinturas, de las cuales 66 eran paisajes. Después de la Segunda Guerra Mundial, los óleos de Troya desaparecieron del Museo Etnológico de Leipzig, a donde Stubel los había llevado. Salvo 3 pinturas que aún se conservan en el Rijksmuseum en Mannheim, al día de hoy solo es posible conocer el contenido de estos óleos por los grabados que se publicaron en el libro de 1886. Stubel y Reis eran 2 jóvenes geólogos, tenían 32 y 29 años respectivamente, que ya habían tenido experiencia en el área de la vulcanología en las islas del Mediterráneo y en el sur de Italia. Como parte de un viaje hacia las islas hawaianas, habían planeado una breve escala para estudiar la región de los Andes. La parada duró casi 10 años. En 1868 desembarcaron en Santa Marta, Colombia. Entre 1871 y 1874 estuvieron en Ecuador, luego se dirigieron a Perú y a Brasil. Reis partió de Río de Janeiro hacia Alemania en 1875 y Stubel continuó el viaje hacia Uruguay, Chile, Argentina y Bolivia. Regresó a Perú y luego fue a los Estados Unidos, donde zarpó hacia Europa en 1877. Esta larga estadía ha sido vista como el mayor esfuerzo explorador de la época en la región, y las descripciones de Humboldt de esa región y su conformación son tan absurdas, falsas y miserables que deben releerse para convencerse uno de que el famoso personaje realmente las escribió. La ambición de Stubel del tamaño de la topografía de los Andes era la superación del icono prusiano. Sin embargo, mejores condiciones y un aumento de la disciplina geológica les permitían la elaboración de un estudio especializado. De igual modo, se apoyaban en las infraestructuras tanto teóricas como materiales de Humboldt y más aún en las de las empresas ilustradas dieciochescas. Un ejemplo de ello es que cuando apenas llegaron a Bogotá, Reis y Stubel utilizaron el observatorio que habían construido Caldas y Mutis y había sido utilizado por el propio Humboldt con el fin de tomar medidas barométricas. En el uso de la metodología humboldtiana fueron más lejos. Los trabajos dedicados a la vulcanología de los Andes, Ecuador y las montañas del Ecuador de 1897, se construyeron bajo el formato de las obras anteriores de Humboldt, es decir, adoptaron la forma de un comentario sobre una serie de representaciones visuales a través de un diálogo con la imagen que iba más allá de lo descriptivo. Los bocetos del Ecuador literalmente concentran las minuciosas visualizaciones producidas durante años sobre los volcanes ecuatorianos. Aunque los conocimientos de la geología habían cambiado desde la época de Humboldt, Reis y Stubel continuaban la tradición de poner el paisaje al centro de su actividad científica. Todavía más allá, conectaron inequívocamente la visualidad del paisaje a sus explicaciones y a su método de investigación sobre la geología andina. Examinado a fondo, el proyecto de Stubel se conformaba como un dispositivo de realidad virtual sobre los Andes, elaborado desde las potencialidades estéticas y científicas del paisaje. El objetivo, como él mismo lo expresaba, era reunir los más de 100 óleos en una sección sobre geografía comparada en el Museo de Etnografía de Leipzig. Ahí, el conjunto de los cuadros, sus descripciones y las colecciones de piedras formarían un amplio programa exhibitivo que pondría en escena la observación geológica que hicieron sobre toda la región, al grado, cito a Stubel, de hacer más o menos innecesaria la observación de la naturaleza in situ. Este sistema de representación visual, pensaba el geólogo, permitiría incluso que otros retomaran la investigación a partir de los cuadros. Stubel expresó abiertamente el ímpetu sistemático de esta unión del paisaje y la investigación geológica. Dada la claridad con que definió sus objetivos, cito in extenso lo que escribió en su prefacio a las montañas volcánicas del Ecuador. Dijo: La peculiaridad de la colección de pinturas en cuestión estriba esencialmente en que forma un todo completo en sí misma. Nos muestra gráficamente la región volcánica del altiplano del Ecuador en toda su extensión, puesto que los cuadros se enlazan unos con otros de tal manera que quedan tan solo pocos vacíos, aquellos pocos de la parte del país que no se han logrado reproducir. En la ejecución sistemática de este trabajo, ante todo, nos interesó representar a cada uno de los volcanes desde todos sus flancos posibles, pero también hemos considerado valioso el hecho de poder presentar la ubicación relativa y el agrupamiento de estructuras volcánicas de formas tan variadas y de proporciones tan distintas. Más adelante escribió: quisiéramos, mediante lo ofrecido aquí, crear un modelo según el cual pueda realizarse la investigación que se haga en ciencias naturales, de regiones extrañas en general y de investigaciones geológico-topográficas en especial, a fin de que avancen al mismo paso de las exigencias siempre crecientes de la ciencia. Fin de cita. La introducción que hizo Alfons Stubel a su obra se presenta como una apología de la estética del paisaje, no solo en su formato pictórico, sino en su potencial de agruparse como una ventana de observación. No solo vio el paisaje como el mejor medio de expresión del conocimiento científico, sino como la base misma de la investigación geológica. En vez de escribir un texto y llenarlo de ilustraciones, dijo el geólogo, lo que se había propuesto es hacer lo contrario y más bien elaborar pinturas, cuya explicación permitiría tomarlas como puntos de partida de nuestras consideraciones geológicas y topográficas. La estructura de ambas obras sobre los Andes se compone por una serie de imágenes paisajísticas a través de las cuales surge la explicación geológica. A partir de esta dura crítica a las prácticas científicas que conceptualizan a la imagen como una ilustración, Stubel comparaba la estética del paisaje pictórico frente a las visualizaciones de la cartografía y la fotografía. Ningún mapa, dijo, puede transmitir el volumen y la forma de los objetos terrestres. La fotografía, por otro lado, al sustraerse únicamente a las leyes de la óptica, es inflexible y no es compatible con una finalidad fisionómico-geológica, afirmó el científico. El dibujo a lápiz es monótono y no capta los matices de la luz y la atmósfera. Sin negar las ventajas de que la observación del geólogo se construya como un patchwork hecho de distintos medios visuales, Stubel puso por encima al paisaje pictórico y lo vio como el centro de la operación cognitiva del geólogo. En medio de estos puntos de vista, enunció que los paisajes que se mostraban en su obra debían ser entendidos como mapas en perspectiva. Rice y Stubel inscribían la estética del paisaje en el centro mismo de su operación geológica. Como muchos otros, pensaban que el vulcanismo tenía su explicación en el principio cosmológico de que la Tierra se había formado a partir de una nube incandescente que desde entonces no había hecho otra cosa más que enfriarse. Esto explicaría el porqué de la actividad volcánica, así como la propia formación de un volcán, como un remanente de las capas calientes inferiores del globo que buscaban salida, aunque cada vez con menor fuerza. A través de 27 preguntas explícitamente derivadas del objetivo de clarificar el origen de los volcanes, los geólogos se proponían la no menospreciable tarea de incidir en uno de los mayores debates científicos de su tiempo. Es necesario tomar en cuenta el ambicioso objetivo científico para localizar la función del paisaje en esta empresa. Para Stubel y Rice, el estudio de la formación volcánica de los Andes, lo que llamaron estudio genético de los volcanes, daba la oportunidad para hacer una teoría sobre el origen y la dinámica del vulcanismo. Sus preguntas implicaban principalmente un estudio morfológico de los volcanes, su situación y distancia frente a otros pertenecientes a la misma cadena montañosa, el tamaño de su cráter, los posibles indicios de su actividad en el pasado, sus alturas, tamaños y formas. Intentaban probar la hipótesis de que los volcanes andinos eran principalmente monogenéticos, es decir, que habían tenido una única erupción masiva en el pasado, la cual había elevado su masa a una gran altura, mientras que en el presente tenía una dinámica menguada. Stubel llamó a esto una teoría monogenética de la actividad volcánica. Con el tiempo, fueron estas apreciaciones generales las que distanciaron a ambos geólogos. Bajo el ángulo de esta teoría, el Cotopaxi representaba un caso especial. El volcán que notablemente había estudiado Humboldt durante su paso por los Andes tenía una actividad eruptiva bastante dinámica. Tan solo en la época moderna se tenían registradas 4 grandes erupciones, en 1534, entre 1742 y 46, en 1858 y en 1874. Esto parecía entrar en contradicción con la teoría monogenética. Primero Rice, en 1872, y luego Stubel, en 1873, subieron hasta el cráter del volcán. Sobre esta hazaña escribieron sendas cartas al presidente ecuatoriano de entonces, Gabriel García Moreno, quien ofreció su apoyo a las exploraciones de los geólogos, y argumentaron por medio de un intrincado mosaico de observaciones que la actividad contemporánea del Cotopaxi era distinta a la de la época de su formación. En el libro de 1886, a través de 4 paisajes grabados y pintados originalmente por Rafael Troya, describían la morfología del volcán, sus anteriores erupciones y su situación dentro de la cadena montañosa. La representación de los distintos ángulos del volcán se volvía una tarea necesaria para profundizar en sus características geológicas. 2 vistas desde Santa Ana de Tiopullo, viendo hacia al lado oriental de la cordillera, confirmaban las hipótesis de Stubel. Al estudiar la morfología del volcán desde este lugar, se podía ver que el edificio nuevo del Cotopaxi había surgido sobre una estructura más vieja, un tanto desgastada y en parte cubierta por el propio volcán más reciente. Esto era visible en la forma asimétrica entre los costados sur y norte de la elevación, un rasgo morfológico que solo desde este punto de vista se volvía claro. Del lado derecho de la imagen, es decir, en el flanco sur del volcán, aparecía la estructura del Picacho, que habría sido parte de ese antiguo volcán sobre el que se superpuso el Cotopaxi. Esta observación confirmaba las suposiciones de los geólogos. El edificio volcánico había tenido una erupción supermasiva en el pasado y las emanaciones recientes eran insignificantes. Stubbe lo comparaba con un termómetro de mercurio roto que goteaba, pero era incapaz de expulsar toda la columna de líquido en su interior. Otros ángulos del Cotopaxi confirmaban el papel de las erupciones pasadas, que no llegaban a pasar la altura de las nieves perpetuas, según se veía en los hilos negros que se desprendían por el cono del volcán. Los geólogos hacían énfasis en que incluso las cañadas más grandes en las laderas del volcán era producto más bien de la acción erosiva que de la actividad volcánica. Todo ello afirmaba su concepción teórica. Era significativo que dentro de este ensamblaje lógico el mayor peso lo tenían los paisajes. La selección del punto de vista y los elementos representados eran cuidadosamente elaborados para fungir como una explicación de carácter geológico. Pese a que en diversas partes de su obra Stubbe criticó mordazmente a Humboldt, ciertamente profundizó el papel científico que el autor del Cosmos le había dado al paisaje. Del mismo modo, continuó el programa de los paisajistas humboldtianos en las Américas. La colaboración entre Troya y Stubbe fue definitiva para llevar a cabo esta tarea. Cito las palabras con que el geólogo se expresó del pintor. El hombre tiene talento, pinta rápido y está dispuesto a cumplir mis órdenes, de manera que los cuadros son a medias mi creación. Nadie ha emprendido antes de mí un torneo gimnástico con cuadros de 1 metro de ancho a través de los Andes. En realidad, casi todas las medidas de las pinturas de Troya eran de menos de medio metro de ancho y 20 centímetros de alto. Sin embargo, estas telas portátiles debían hacerse in situ y transportarse durante semanas, la mayoría de las veces con malas condiciones climáticas. La pesada nubosidad de las regiones andinas complicaban la obtención de una vista completa de extensas regiones o de la figura de los volcanes. Muchas veces, como se dice en las descripciones que hicieron los geólogos, esperaban durante días a que el velo de nubes se abriera para obtener una imagen plena del terreno. Esta práctica no solo ponía en diálogo la explicación geológica y la estética paisajística, volvía codependientes sus medios y técnicas al constituirse como un único proceso de observación. Más que ningún otro programa paisajístico de fin de siglo, el de los Andes de Stubbe se mostraba como la calca de los procesos de observación geológicos. Geología y paisaje se pensaban como disciplinas paralelas. Es posible entender todo el programa científico de los geólogos como una disciplina de investigación visual. Además de los paisajes, durante todo su viaje amasaron una colección de alrededor de 2,000 fotografías. Igualmente coleccionaron una cantidad importante de piezas arqueológicas y textiles que vendieron al Museo Etnológico de Berlín a cambio del financiamiento para la publicación de su obra. Antes de cederlas, no obstante, hicieron acuarelas de muchas de ellas que hoy se conservan en el archivo de Stubbe en Leipzig. Sin entrar a detalle en el trabajo arqueológico y etnográfico que los geólogos también llevaron a cabo, es posible notar que esta práctica obedecía a los principios omniabarcantes de otras exploraciones en el pasado, bajo la posibilidad de hallar las relaciones entre naturaleza y cultura. A pesar de esta producción y acumulación ingente de imágenes, el propósito primario de la expedición de Stubbe y Rice estaba afincado en la vulcanología andina. Su investigación y después la publicación de su obra se inscribieron en plena transformación disciplinaria de la geología, en su especialización creciente y en su demarcación epistemológica. Es válida la comparación con lo que sucedía al tiempo en México durante estas décadas. También existe una relación entre la pintura de José María Velasco y el desarrollo de la geología en el país. Aunque la obra de Rafael Troya, posterior a la expedición de Stubbe y Rice, se ha caracterizado como la satisfacción a la demanda visual de los hacendados ecuatorianos, Troya, al igual que Velasco, fue integrado al movimiento cosmopolita de exhibiciones internacionales. Ambos participaron en la Exposición Mundial de Chicago de 1893. También sus paisajes se usaron como imágenes prototípicas de la nación en el contexto exhibitivo de la Escuela de Hudson. Estos movimientos trazan la formación de la estética humboldtiana en el marco de las experiencias posindependientes de América, en las Américas. En el Cotopaxi de Troya de 1874, si bien existe una representación esmerada en las particularidades morfológicas del volcán, es también cierto que elementos importantes para las observaciones geológicas como la salida del Picacho han desaparecido. Los comentaristas de esta pintura enfatizan el hecho de que el horizonte de volcanes está suavizado, la nieve del Cotopaxi se extiende más allá de lo habitual y la nota de la escena, con el personaje que proviene del tema pastoral, se vuelca sobre la placidez de la llanura montañosa. Troya añade una serie de personajes en sus pinturas de años posteriores. Carlos y Cumandá, los protagonistas de la novela de Juan de León Mera, suplanta la presencia del equipo expedicionario por héroes míticos del mestizaje poscolonial. Sin sustraer del paisaje el sentido geológico, Troya lo fusiona con los modelos del Tratado de Jean-Baptiste de Perthes de 1818, que a través de Stubel había llegado a manos del pintor. Resuenan en esta representación los modelos y temas preferidos por el tratadista, como Tivoli, desarrollados por los pintores suizos y alemanes afincados en Roma, como por ejemplo la representación de las cascadas de Franz Nebel, paisaje con las cascadas de Tivoli de 1871. El árbol de los primeros planos que corta la escena verticalmente y une tierra y cielo juega un papel simbólico, es un elemento que se compagina con la iconografía arbórea presente en el imaginario paisajístico centroeuropeo de la época. El Cotopaxi de Troya, ya no el de Stubel y Rice, agrupa y estratifica modelos, metamorfosea la observación geológica en una imagen convincente sobre las bondades de la naturaleza ecuatoriana, se contrapone a la imagen cataclísmica de Frederic Edwin Church sobre el mismo volcán. El hecho de que ambas representaciones sean parte de las derivaciones estéticas del programa paisajístico de Humboldt me permite concluir con una breve reflexión. A diferencia de lo que creía Gould, la variedad e intensidad de las diversas transformaciones de la pintura del paisaje en la segunda mitad del siglo XIX, como una onda post-humboldtiana, demuestran que el modelo de Humboldt evolucionó de forma compleja dentro de distintas culturas visuales. Una de las fotografías que se hallan en el archivo de Stubel muestra un retrato pictórico del prusiano. Es una de las representaciones más extrañas del explorador. La imagen evanescente del personaje es fantasmagórica. La pintura fotografiada proviene del artista quiteño Rafael Salas, que a su vez probablemente la copió de un óleo realizado por José Cortés de Alcocer, quien hizo el retrato durante la estancia del prusiano en Quito, en la residencia de Juan Pío de Montúfar. Humboldt aparece con una casaca y más cerca de los estereotipos con que se representaba a las élites criollas. Al igual que sus programas visuales, la identidad de Humboldt transmuta en una vorágine de apropiaciones que se reconstruyen como imágenes emotivas de las naturalezas locales. Este movimiento hace consistente la pregunta sobre el discurrir paralelo de su mitología y sus imágenes, como epifitas, las plantas que se instalan sobre otras, dando lugar a una densa masa vegetativa. Un comentarista argentino, en 1929, resume esta operación. Al referirse a Humboldt, escribía lo siguiente: a la luz del recuerdo de sus maravillosas pinturas de la naturaleza americana, no revivía una América ideal, era otra la América que él había descrito llamado la América de los trópicos, la América de la que era una porción la montaña donde yo había nacido, el terruño tucumano, con bosques profundos, su lujuriosa faramalla de epifita, las quebradas rumorosas y húmedas, los torrentes magníficos, las lluvias diluvianas que los crean, las puestas de sol, el vivero de estrellas de su cielo. Gracias.
I have a proposal, as we have gone a few minutes over, to save questions for Omar and the final speaker, which we have now, and have those together. Would that be okay? So thank you, Omar, for your paper, and I will invite Mariana up, and then we will have a few minutes for questions, and I'll invite you back up. So our next speaker is Mariana Davidson from the University of California, Irvine. Her paper is titled Regulatory Mountain Aesthetics of Seattle's Alaska-Yukon-Pacific Exposition of 1909.
Okay, give me a moment here. Can you help me? Great, thank you. Thank you, Jay, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to join you all today. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor. So, the argument that I'm presenting to you today hinges upon a close reading of this seemingly banal image. So I'll begin with an introduction of this image and its context. Framed by old-growth conifers, the glacial-capped volcanic peak of Mount Rainier rises high above fog-enshrouded forest and the formally ordered fairgrounds of Seattle's Alaska-Yukon-Pacific Exposition of 1909. Through extensive negotiations between the site's landscape architect, John C. Olmsted, architectural supervisor, John Galen Howard, consulting engineers, and fair commissioners, primarily banking, railroad, and timber tycoons. This outward-facing view became the central axis of this exposition and the primary organizing element meant to solidify this fair's vision of unity between the aesthetically engaging landscape and the successful exploitation of its lands, resources, and populations. Deviating from the typically self-enclosed layout of preceding World's Fairs, this sculpted sightline, deemed Rainier Vista, provided a direct view of the primary geographic features that afford for the temperate climate and verdant abundance of this landscape. The Cascade Mountain Range that bisects the state of Washington and whose massive peaks trap and release atmospheric moisture to the western expanses of this state in the form of steady rains and glacially sourced rivers. The fair's official photographer, Frank H. Noel, composed this image from the top of the exposition's U.S. government building, identified as number 1 in this layout, and effectively helped construct what I argue to be the exposition's regulatory aesthetics of harmony and management. Through an analysis of this photograph, alongside a consideration of the heritage of creative and scientific agents that propagated an imaginary of human, non-human relationality in this region, I make the case that the geoaesthetics of this site served as a practice of administration, working to define this region and to set the stage for the next phase of progress for the 20th century American settler nation. As seen from the high vantage point of Noel's image, formally ordered paths and sunken gardens create perspective lines that guide the eye down Rainier Vista and converge in the misty forest at the southern end of the site. The arching Beaux-Arts agricultural building on the right and its mirror duplicate on the left, the manufacturer's building, encircle the central water feature, Geyser Basin, and grasp toward the partially enshrouded trail at the center of this image, which continues into the middle ground. Looking down this central court of honor, the paths to the right and left lead the eye to the receding trail, which connects to a foggy line of luminance that bisects the center of the image, demarcating the southern periphery of the fairgrounds as it encases and dissolves the dense woods along a portage connecting Lake Washington and Lake Union, alongside which the Northern Pacific Railroad runs. As this glowing band of mist winds along the shores of Lake Washington to the left, then cuts diagonally to the right across to the right side of the volcanic mountain's wide base, it highlights receding expanses of the region's most abundant natural resource and exported good, timber, while also tracing out the most valuable aspect of this site and this region, the well-established, at this point, commercial transportation routes of the Northern Pacific Railroad and the portage connecting the freshwater Lake Washington to Lake Union and Seattle's harbors beyond. This route not only linked this area of the Pacific Northwest to the rest of the United States, but also reflected the future of global commerce underscored by the mission statement of this fair, that Seattle's geographic position allowed for the establishment of trade networks with the countries and territories of the Pacific Rim, networks that would allow for the crucial 20th century progress and expansion of the industrial capitalist settler nation. This image, I claim, assisted in initiating an experience that placed the viewer in a position of administration and regulation, encouraging spectators to not only consume the fair's globally sourced assortment of material goods, but also to begin to conceptualize the interrelated systems of developing communities, natural resources, and lines of transport that would allow for a local and national commercial success. In advance of visiting the fair, image such as this, accompanied by descriptive text, positioned viewers and visitors to embody the regulatory gaze established by this sightline. John Muir, seen here during an ascent of Mount Rainier with an indigenous guide and the artist, William Keith, whose own relational thinking about conservation was largely inspired by Alexander von Humboldt, was one of the early champions for the conservation of Mount Rainier, criticizing processes of nearby deforestation that had been the result of American progress. Writing in 1889, Muir explained that the Puget Sound region of the recently admitted Washington Territory was increasingly teeming with loggers and developers aimed to quickly extract and process resources of timber and coal by, quote, hacking, burning, and blasting their way deeper into the wilderness, beneath the sky and beneath the ground, unquote. He continues, quote, the wedges of development are being driven hard, and none of the obstacles or defenses of nature can long withstand the onset of this immeasurable industry, end quote. In these quotes, we can recognize the influence of Humboldt on Muir. Following ecological theories put forth by Humboldt, Muir pronounced the crucial importance of mountains and their forests for the cultivation of prosperous populations, both human and non-human. Muir insisted that the conservation and preservation of Mount Rainier's forested slopes and surrounding lands would be of principal importance for the maintenance of its supply of water to the agricultural expanses below, its fauna, communities, and the populations of the Puget Sound region. Simultaneously, and also in the vein of Humboldt's writings, Muir asserted the cultural power and value of Rainier's visually striking appearance and of the experience of its varied yet interdependent topography, from the smallest detail of its flora on the subalpine slopes to the immense sublime glacial sheets at its peak. Thus, the landscape upon which Seattle's exposition hinged was reinforced by such writings and by the establishment of Mount Rainier National Park. Writing in defense of the maintenance of the forests of the U.S. national parks, another adamant follower of Humboldt, Gifford Pinchot, reiterated the necessity of regulating these natural spaces. In The Use of Natural Forests, two images from which we can see here, published in 1907 by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Pinchot insists that these spaces be saved from fires and excessive logging, proposing instead a managed approach, which would ensure the sustainability of these resources. What these visions of landscape conceal, however, is the fact that these quote-unquote virgin forests had been managed by indigenous populations through controlled burns long before white settlers utilized such rhetorical and aesthetic practices to stake their claims. Specifically, the site of Seattle's exposition of 1909 had been the site of a wealthy Duwamish village due to its prominent position, and it was the site of 7 longhouses. What is primarily at stake in the larger version of this project is the interrogation of modernist aesthetic valuations of the Western American landscape alongside the continued entrenchment of settler colonial imperialism. While the gaze of 19th century American landscape paintings, which places viewer at a similar point of prospect, can be interpreted as staking ideological claims to American frontier wilderness that would be raised along with the eradication of its native populations, my emphasis on regulation points to the early 20th century efforts to manage these resources, peoples, and the cultural relation between place and people in order to ensure that these resources would continue to bolster the development and expansion of a nation. The regulatory geoaesthetics that I trace through Noel's image specifically focus on the shaping of a future in which those resources are both economically viable and ecologically conscious. While the line of mist in Noel's photograph of Rainier Vista traces out and highlights the importance of this site for the propagation of human, non-human unity and for the advancement of commercial trade in the region, it simultaneously reveals the artificiality of this image and the aesthetic claims to control. This view, framed by Noel's image, culminates abruptly with the towering facade of Mount Rainier. As the eye travels from the middle ground to the mountain's peak pinnacle in the sky, the artificiality of this photographic composition becomes apparent. Rainier's fractured facade of volcanic rock and ice stands in clear profile against a sky of wispy clouds. The stark juxtaposition of a hazy sky and sharply pictured mountain reveals that the composed nature of this image and its landscape. In fact, Noel's superimposition of two glass plate negatives to create this Noel superimposed two glass plate negatives to create this composed picture. Overlaying a second glass plate negative of Mount Rainier, taken on a clear day, Noel presented the mountain amid atmospherics that would typically veil the 14,000-foot peak, while also bringing this defined landscape much closer into view. Noel's image positioned consumers of the fair to simultaneously embrace this site's unique entanglement of seemingly natural and formally designed landscape features, while also asserting an ontologically extractive relation to the material resources of this region. This image exposes a rift between the imaginary of a place constructed by world-making practices and the actual processes and procedures necessary to uphold this artificiality. Highlighting the construction of this imaginary, I have thus begun to elaborate on how 19th century aesthetics and scientific understandings of environment became enfolded within 20th century regimes of governance and administration. Noel's image, like 19th century landscape paintings, tried to veil its complicity in settler colonialism through detailed depictions of mountain aesthetics. A close visual analysis, however, reveals the false construction of this imaginary of unity put forth by this exposition, which was then carried forth into the next century of this region's aesthetic production. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Omar, come back up. We'll take a few questions for both speakers. Found it quite interesting as we move forward in time, all of the manipulations of Humboldtian thought in these various instances. So, questions for either speaker? Professor DeLu.
Thank you. Those were both great papers, and if you're up for a combination question, I'd be curious to hear you talk about, because both of you were talking more so in the first paper about representations of volcanoes, and I'd be curious to hear how you see the different visual cultures of the volcanic relating to one another. But my specific question is for Mariana, and it has to do with the orientation of this photograph. I mean, do you see this photograph as, because I'm convinced that the exposition and its representation here are administrative and regulatory, but do you sense this as a Western, do you see this as a Western orientation or a Pacific orientation? Because there would be a difference, especially at the turn of the century, given not just U.S. policy with regard to indigenous communities, but with regard to the Pacific Rim and exclusion acts. And so I'm curious to hear you talk about the difference between West and Pacific and how that difference or the blurring of the difference between those two things might manifest here.
So I am really interested in this image because of its outward-facing view, and I see that as a major divergence from the previous World's Fairs, of course, and I think it is specifically because there is this opening outward toward the Pacific Rim, but equally, I mean, I'm talking about, kind of like the veiling of indigenous histories here, which is a small portion of what I'm talking about in the larger project, but it's equally veiling kind of like the labor sources, et cetera, that were needed to build a railroad, and which were very present in Seattle, even though protests were happening against various communities, like the 1889 protest against Chinese laborers there. But the exposition was interesting in that it brought in certain like Asian cultures, while as kind of like such as the Japanese culture, where there were some administrators from Japan who came over, and it was well represented. Whereas other indigenous populations from places like the Philippines, Alaska, and Hawaii were represented as anthropological case studies. So it's the third section, so this is kind of the introduction. This sets up a chapter, and then the third section of the chapter gets into the representation of these various cultures.
I have a follow-up question for Mariana. It occurs to me that this fascinating photograph brings together threads from two earlier papers. Jens Baumgarten's very interesting picture,
Yes.
discussion of mountains turned into architecture, and it seems that that is definitely happening here on some level. At the same time, I'm reminded of the Empson painting that Veronica discussed, of the view of the mountains.
Yes.
Very contrived in its framing to be a view. And I'm wondering if this tells us something about Humboldtian vision as orchestrating spaces on a grand scale. Do you care to speculate on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, there have been several quotes today from Humboldt that talk about like taking the aesthetics into the interior, or the aesthetics having an impression on the interior of a person, you know, through perception. But I also see these, like this composition in particular, these buildings kind of reaching out and bringing the landscape in, also the superimposition of the negative image, bringing the landscape closer. This is like literally grabbing and bringing this into a culture, but also the person who is standing there at this point of prospect, perhaps.
It's hard not to think of Jefferson's Monticello, too, or his academical campus at Charlottesville with these wings reaching out to the mountains of Virginia and fictively to the entire West.
Yes.
So this seems like an extension of that kind
Yeah.
of colonial vision.
I think that this type of architecture was absolutely, has long history of precedence, but I think it's so interesting because it is now enfolded into governance and directed by, or we're seeing it from the U.S. government building, but it's also under direction of these corporate and industrial tycoons and the dictates of the government, who are working to bring the Pacific Rim in as well. But I wanted to go back to your question about what the volcano is doing. So I see it as a mirror of the U.S. government building, kind of looking back, but also simultaneously regulating on its own terms because of the atmospheric condition. Well, I don't know the specific terms offhand, but there is a cloud that collects on the top around the crater of this volcano. And there are so many accounts in newspapers and writings that, oh, is it erupting? You know, is this like, it's this threat as well. So it's kind of simultaneously managing its population through this kind of eternal threat, possibly.
Which strikes me as different from what you were talking about, because those images domesticated the volcano to a certain extent, right? I mean, they attempted to bring it within the scope of human control and regulation. And I couldn't help but see those staffage figures, the little sheep and the shepherds, as part of that impulse.
That's exactly what I was going to ask about the shepherd, the sheep.
Sí, además, bueno, perdón porque conteste en español, ¿no? Pero quizás pueda ser más claro. La escena es una mujer, ¿no?, que teje y está junto a unos borregos y probablemente teje la lana de los borregos. Entonces yo pienso que esa escena particular sí tiene dos interpretaciones, ¿no? Una es que eh, traduce esta visión geológica, ¿no?, que había mencionado sobre Stubel y Rice, ¿no?, el sentido en que estamos viviendo en una época geológica en la que ya se han calmado las fuerzas de la naturaleza, ¿no? Es básicamente la propuesta. Pero la otra es, creo que tiene que ver con una interpretación también muy de la ciencia de Humboldt, es decir, el carácter de un pueblo está en relación a su clima, ¿no? Entonces está usando esta mujer los productos, ¿no?, que tiene en el altiplano ecuatoriano para transformar la naturaleza, ¿no? Entonces creo que es una escena compleja y el mayor cambio que se ve entre la estética de Troya durante la expedición geológica de Stubel y Reis a los óleos que hizo después, ¿no?, de esa expedición, tienen que ver con la aparición de esos modelos, ¿no?, de ese, I know in English, different staffage, ¿no?, en el uso de diferentes personajes, ¿no?, todos relacionados además con la cultura literaria decimonónica. Entonces habría que explorar un poco más. Quiero decir que también es una investigación que estoy comenzando, no tengo conclusiones, ¿no?
One last quick question. Thank you.
Hola, mi pregunta es para Omar. Me gustó mucho tu exposición y quería preguntarte, creo que argumentas muy bien durante todo el trabajo por qué escogen el paisaje como digamos, como el medio perfecto y el medio más científico para explicar las complejidades, ¿no? Incluso sobre otras imágenes como los mapas, las gráficas y todo esto. Y sin embargo, dices que Stubel le llama al mapa, digo, al paisaje un mapa en perspectiva, ¿no? Eso me llamó mucho la atención y quisiera saber si nos puedes como hablar más, porque parece que hay dos ideas de lo que es un mapa y hay uno que se acerca más a la coreografía, bueno, es como una pregunta, o más al paisaje, y pues no sé si nos puedes platicar un poco más de eso, que se me hizo muy interesante.
Gracias, Mónica. Bueno, toda la introducción de Skizzen aus Ecuador es, que creo que eso es lo más valioso de la obra, es una teoría del paisaje y de por qué el paisaje sirve dentro de la geología. Entonces, lo que hace Studel ahí es como enumerar las herramientas visuales con que se hace geología, que son la fotografía, ¿no?, principalmente, y la topografía, ¿no? Y es clarísimo en ello, o sea, sorprende de la claridad de la propuesta, que el paisaje está por encima de eso, ¿no? Entonces, cuando está hablando, o cuando habló Stubel de los mapas, ¿no?, de los mapas topográficos, dijo, él habla de paisaje, pero dice, pero bueno, en relación a los mapas, mis paisajes son como mapas en perspectiva, ¿no?, hablando de la exactitud que tienen y de una cosa que era importantísima para el tipo de investigación que quería hacer, que era examinar la morfología de los volcanes, ¿no? Entonces, ahí hay un enlace, ¿no?, como muy directo y muy claro, ¿no?, entre el paisaje y la investigación geológica, ¿no? Entonces, sí, por una parte, el paisaje se convierte en un objeto cartográfico que tiene en relación con la cartografía, ¿no? Bueno, eso ya estaba presente de otro modo, ¿no? Antes, no quiero decir que Struve lo haya inventado, pero se vuelve central en la forma en que está construyendo su planteamiento. Y en segundo lugar, la forma en que creo que es importante, busca hacer la exhibición de paisajes, ¿no? Como poner en relación todos los paisajes, no es solamente en la obra, ¿no? Sino tenía que ver con la creación de este museo de geografía comparada, ¿no? En la que decías era como una ventana, ¿no? A toda la geología y a toda la cadena montañosa del Ecuador. La crítica más grande que le hace a la investigación de Humboldt en relación a eso, dice Humboldt solo visitó el Cotopaxi y el Chimborazo, y para explicar la geología de los Andes hay que subir al Altar, al Tungurahua, a todos los volcanes, ¿no? de la cadena montañosa del Ecuador. Entonces, por eso realmente constituye esta colección de 100 paisajes, ¿no?
All right, well, let's thank our, oh, who's speaking? Okay, sorry. I'm hearing voices in my head. Thank you all so much for being with us. Another round of applause for our speakers. Thank you. This concludes the afternoon session. Thank you all for hanging in there with us. And the colloquium will continue tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., so we welcome you all back. And lastly, just a word to our speakers. If you would just gather here, we'll be making our way to some transportation to our next event. So thank you all.